The Millionaire's Life. Richard Coleman had everything people usually dream of. He was a successful businessman, owner of several companies, and lived in a huge mansion on the outskirts of the city. His cars, vacations, and lifestyle made him look like the happiest man in the world. But what people didn't know was that Richard's personal life was not as perfect as his wealth. Years ago, he had been married to a woman named Clara. She was beautiful, kind-hearted, and deeply loving. In the early years of their marriage, they shared a simple apartment and dreamed of building a life together. Clara stood beside him through the difficult times, even when Richard struggled financially. She believed in him when no one else did. But when success came, so did distance. Richard got busier, chasing contracts, meetings, and expansions. Clara longed for his time and love, but he often returned home late, tired, or already on his phone. Arguments began, small at first, but they grew louder with every passing month. Richard convinced himself that he was working hard for them, but Clara only wanted her husband back. After years of feeling ignored and unappreciated, their marriage ended in divorce. Clara moved away quietly, without asking for much. Richard thought she wanted freedom, but in truth, she wanted peace. They never spoke again. Years later, more than a decade passed. Richard's wealth doubled, his name appeared in magazines, and he was often photographed with models at charity events. But at night, when the noise faded, he sometimes thought about Clara. He wondered where she was, if she had remarried, if she was happy. One morning, as Richard scrolled through the news on his tablet, a small obituary caught his attention. It was Clara's name. She had died suddenly, at the age of only 46. Richard froze. The past came rushing back. Her laughter, her support, her tears. He realized, with a painful twist in his chest, that he had never apologized to her properly. He never told her how much she meant, or how much she had sacrificed for him. For the first time in years, Richard felt something money could not fix: regret. Visiting the grave. 2 weeks later, on a cloudy afternoon, Richard drove to the cemetery where Clara had been buried. He wore a simple black suit, without bodyguards or chauffeurs. He didn't want anyone around. When he reached the grave, he was surprised. He expected to be alone, but instead, he saw 2 young girls kneeling there, their shoulders shaking as they cried. Richard stopped a few steps away. They looked about 15 or 16, maybe sisters. Their hands gently touched the headstone as they whispered, "We miss you, Mom." Richard's heart skipped. Mom. He stared at them in disbelief. Clara had daughters. But how? They weren't his. The shocking truth. When the girls noticed Richard standing behind them, they wiped their tears, looking both cautious and curious. "Who are you?" one of them asked softly. Richard cleared his throat. His voice was heavier than usual. I knew your mother a long time ago." The younger girl tilted her head. "Did you love her?" The question pierced Richard's chest. His lips trembled. "Yes, very much. But I made mistakes." The girls looked at each other, then back at him. One finally whispered, "We never met our father. Mom never told us who he was. She just said he wasn't part of our lives." Richard's legs weakened. He stepped closer to the gravestone and read the words carefully. Beneath Clara's name were 2 additional ones: "Beloved mother of Emily and Sarah." His heart thundered. These weren't just strangers. These were Clara's daughters, and possibly his. Searching for answers, Richard spent the next days in a haze. He couldn't stop thinking about the 2 girls. Their faces, their voices, the way they cried, it all haunted him. He hired a private investigator, not out of cold curiosity, but desperation. Within a week, the report arrived. Clara had never remarried. She had worked 2 jobs to raise her daughters alone. The girls were twins, born less than a year after the divorce. Richard dropped the file. His chest tightened until he could barely breathe. Clara's daughters were his daughters. All those years he had been living in luxury, while Clara had struggled alone, raising his children. The meeting. The next Sunday, Richard returned to the cemetery. This time, he found the girls again. He approached slowly, his voice trembling. Emily, Sarah, he called softly, using the names from the report. They turned, surprised that he knew them. "I need to tell you something," Richard said, his eyes wet. "I believe I'm your father." The girls froze. Silence stretched between them. Then Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "That's not possible. Mom never said. She never wanted to burden you," Richard interrupted gently. "But it's true. I only just learned. I left her at the worst time. I didn't know about you. If I had," his voice cracked. "If I had, I never would have left." Tears rolled down his cheeks. The girls stared at him, their expressions torn between anger, confusion, and pain. Strangers and family. Over the next few weeks, Richard tried carefully to earn their trust. He didn't want to scare them with sudden wealth or grand gestures. Instead, he met them at cafes, walked with them in parks, listened to their stories about their mother. He learned that Clara had been an extraordinary mother. Despite working long hours, she never let them feel unloved. She attended their school plays, cooked with them when she had energy, and always reminded them to be kind and strong. Every story they shared deepened Richard's guilt but also his admiration for Clara. She had given everything to their daughters without asking for a single coin from him. At night, Richard sat in his mansion, looking at the empty halls, and realized for the first time that wealth meant nothing without love to fill it. A new beginning. It wasn't easy. Emily and Sarah struggled to accept him fully. Sometimes they lashed out, telling him he had no right to suddenly appear in their lives. Other times, they cried, wishing their mother had lived long enough to see this moment. But Richard never gave up. He attended their school events, just as Clara once had. He drove them to places they loved, not in luxury cars, but in simple ones, so they would feel comfortable. He asked about their dreams and listened with all his heart. Months passed, and slowly, the wall between them began to crumble. The girls started to smile more when he was around. They showed him old photos of Clara, and for the first time in years, Richard laughed through his tears. The grave again. On the 1-year anniversary of Clara's passing, Richard, Emily, and Sarah stood together at her grave. This time, there were no strangers, only a family. Richard placed a bouquet of lilies on the grave and whispered, "Clara, I was blind. You gave me everything, and I gave you so little in return. But I promise you now, I'll take care of them. I'll be the father they deserve." Emily squeezed his hand. Sarah leaned on his shoulder. For the first time in decades, Richard felt something he hadn't known he was missing. Not just wealth, but belonging. Reflection. Life had given Richard endless chances to make money, but only one chance to love truly. He had lost Clara, but he had found her in their daughters. Though guilt would always live in his heart, so would gratitude. Because in the quiet place of a cemetery, he had discovered not just sorrow, but also the beginning of redemption. And the two girls who once cried alone at their mother's grave now had someone to stand beside them, a father who finally understood what mattered most.